For years I believed my parents couldn't afford to support me. But last week I found out they had been helping my cousin financially instead, while I struggled alone. And I don't know how to forgive them for choosing someone else over their own child. I cheated on my wife because I thought I deserved better than the scraps had given me. That's the truth I'm finally ready to admit after losing everything that actually mattered. Sarah and I had been married for 6 years when it happened. We were living paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment, both working dead-end jobs, watching our friends buy houses and take vacations while we counted pennies for groceries. I'd grown poor, or so I thought, watching my parents struggle to make ends meet. They drilled into me that money was tight, that I needed to be grateful for what little we had, that asking for help was shameful. When I met Lisa at a work conference, she represented everything I thought I'd been denied. She had a corner office, designer clothes, talked about her condo in the city like it was nothing special. She laughed at my jokes in a way that made me feel clever instead of desperate. For the first time in years I felt like someone saw potential in me instead of just another guy grinding away at. The flirting started innocent enough. Coffee meetings that ran long, late night texts about work that somehow turned personal. I told I wasn't crossing any lines because I wasn't physically touching her, just talking, just feeling valued by someone who seemed to have her together. Sarah noticed the change in me before I did. She'd ask why I was on my phone so much, why I seemed distracted during our conversations. I'd snap at her for being paranoid, accuse her of not trusting me. The irony burns now how I made her feel crazy for sensing what was actually happening. Lisa made her move 3 months into our friendship. We were at another conference, different city, hotel bar after the sessions ended. She leaned in close, her hand on my thigh, and whispered that she'd gotten us a room upstairs. Said she could tell I was unhappy, that I deserved someone who appreciated what I had to offer. I should have walked away, should have called Sarah, confessed the emotional affair, worked on rebuilding what we had. Instead I followed Lisa to that elevator, my wedding ring burning against my finger like it knew what I was about to destroy. That wasn't even good. It was desperate and hollow and left me feeling emptier than before. But I convinced it meant something because the alternative was admitting I'd just blown my marriage for nothing. Over the next 6 months I lived a double. Business trips that weren't really business trips. Working late when I was actually at Lisa's place. Lying so smoothly it scared me. Sarah knew. Of course she knew. She just couldn't prove it yet. She'd look at me across our tiny kitchen table during dinner, and I could see the questions in her eyes. The confusion about why her husband had become a stranger. I'd reach for her hand and she'd let me take it, but there was no warmth there anymore. Just the ghost of what we used to have. The worst part wasn't the lying or the sneaking around. It was how I started to resent Sarah for not being Lisa. She'd come home tired from her job at the nonprofit, wanting to curl on our second-hand couch and watch Netflix, and I'd feel this surge of irritation. Why couldn't she be more ambitious? Why didn't she push herself to want more from? I was rewriting our entire history to justify what I was doing. Suddenly, Sarah wasn't the woman who'd supported my dreams and held me through panic about money. She was the anchor dragging me down, keeping me from becoming the man Lisa saw in me. The affair ended the way they all do. Lisa got bored, found someone else, left me with nothing but guilt and the taste of my own stupidity. She didn't even have the decency to let me down easy. Just stopped returning calls, blocked my number, went back to treating me like a stranger at work functions. I could have stopped there. Could have gone home to Sarah, confessed everything, begged for forgiveness. We might have survived it. She loved me enough that she might have tried. Instead, I doubled down. Told the problem wasn't that I'd cheated but that I'd cheated with the wrong person. Started looking for the next validation, the next escape from the I'd convinced wasn't enough. That's when I met Jessica. Jessica was different from Lisa. Younger, more impressed by my stories, easier to manipulate. She worked at a restaurant I'd started frequenting during my lunch breaks, always complimenting my tie or asking about my work like I was the most interesting man she'd ever met. I was pathetic enough to believe it was genuine. This time I didn't even pretend to have boundaries. Within weeks we were texting constantly. She'd send photos of herself getting ready for work, innocent enough to maintain plausible deniability but provocative enough to keep me hooked. I'd delete the messages immediately, paranoid about Sarah finding them, but the thrill of having a secret was intoxicating. Sarah was trying so hard to save us during this period. She'd suggest date nights we couldn't afford, plan little surprises with our limited budget, ask if we could talk about whatever was creating distance between us. I'd brush her off, claim work was stressing me out, promise we'd reconnect soon. Always soon. Never now. The lies became more elaborate. I opened a separate bank account, claiming it was for saving to surprise her with something special. Really, I was using it to take Jessica out to places Sarah and I could never afford. Expensive dinners, concerts, weekend trips I claimed were work-related. Jessica didn't ask too many questions about why I couldn't stay overnight, or why she could never call me at home. She was young enough to think she was dating a mysterious older man instead of a married cheater burning through his integrity. 3 months into the Jessica affair, my world started cracking in ways I couldn't control. Sarah found a restaurant receipt in my jacket pocket for a place we'd never been to. 2 meals, expensive. When she asked about it, I panicked and claimed it was a work dinner with a colleague. She wanted to know which colleague, why I hadn't mentioned it, why there were only 2 meals if it was a business meeting. I watched her face change as I stumbled through explanations that made no sense. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was knowledge. She knew I was lying, and we both knew she knew. Who is she? Sarah asked, and the question hung in the air like smoke. I should have confessed everything right then. Instead I got angry, accused her of being paranoid, of not trusting me after 6 years of marriage. Made her feel guilty for asking reasonable questions about obvious lies. The gaslighting came so naturally it horrified me even as I was doing it. Sarah stopped sleeping in our bed that night, started sleeping on the couch, claiming she needed space to think. I'd lie awake listening to her cry through the thin walls, knowing I was the reason for every sob, and somehow still felt more sorry for than for her. The breaking point came when Sarah decided to surprise me at work for my birthday. She'd scraped together money for a nice lunch, wanted to take me somewhere special to try to reconnect. My secretary told her I'd taken a half day for a family emergency. Sarah knew we had no family emergencies. She knew exactly what kind of emergency had required my immediate attention. I was with Jessica at her apartment when Sarah called. We were in bed mid-afternoon, Jessica laughing at something on her phone while I stared at the ceiling wondering how I'd become the kind of man who lies to his wife about dying relatives. When my phone rang and Sarah's name appeared, the guilt hit me like a physical. "Hey," I answered, trying to sound normal while Jessica traced patterns on my chest. "Where are?" Sarah's voice was completely flat. "Work emergency, remember? I told this morning." The lie came automatically, even though we both knew it was pointless now. "I'm at office. They said left hours ago for a family emergency." The silence stretched between us while Jessica looked at me with confused eyes. I got walked to the window, watched people on the street living honest lives while mine fell apart. "Sarah, don't." Her voice cracked. "Just don't. Come home when you're ready to tell me the truth." She hung. Jessica asked what was wrong, and I realized I'd have to explain to my girlfriend that my wife had just caught me cheating. The absurdity of my situation hit me all at once. I was about to two women because I couldn't figure out how to be grateful for the one who'd actually loved me. I told Jessica everything that night. About Sarah, about Lisa, about the web of lies I'd built around my pathetic need to feel important. To her credit, she didn't scream or throw things. She just looked at me with a mixture of disgust and pity that deeper than anger would have. "We're not the person I thought were," she said, and I knew she was right. "I know. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to get this complicated." Complicated. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We're married. Lied to me for months. There's nothing complicated about that. You're just a liar." She asked me to leave, and I drove home to face Sarah knowing my marriage was over. The apartment felt different when I walked in, colder. Sarah was sitting at our kitchen table with a glass of and a stack of papers. "These are the divorce forms," she said without looking. "I printed them this afternoon." Sarah filed for divorce the next Monday. No dramatic confrontation, no screaming match, no chance for me to grovel my way back into her good graces. She'd made her decision with the same quiet determination she'd brought to everything else, and I was too much of a coward to it. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. Sarah wanted nothing from me except her freedom, which somehow made it worse. She didn't ask for alimony, didn't over our few possessions, didn't try to punish me financially. She just wanted me gone from her as quickly and cleanly as possible. I moved into a studio apartment across town, the kind of place I'd lived before I met Sarah. Beige walls, noisy neighbors, a refrigerator that hummed too loud, and a shower that never quite got hot enough. Every morning I'd wake and remember all over again what I'd lost. The worst part was how easily Sarah moved on. Through mutual friends I heard she'd started therapy, joined a hiking group, seemed lighter without me dragging her down. She was thriving in ways she never had during our marriage, and the message was clear: I hadn't been the loving husband I'd thought I was. I'd been dead weight. Work became unbearable. Everyone knew about the divorce, and while nobody said anything directly, I could feel their judgment. These were people who'd attended our wedding, who'd seen how Sarah looked at me like I hung the moon. Now they watched me eat lunch alone, and probably wondered what kind of man throws away a woman like that. Lisa had transferred to another department, but occasionally I'd see her in the elevator or the break room. She'd nod politely the way acknowledge a stranger, and I'd remember that to her, I'd never been anything more than a temporary distraction. The man I thought she saw in me had never existed. Jessica had blocked me on everything after that last night. I'd drive past her restaurant sometimes hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but never had the courage to go in. What would I say? That I was sorry for lying? That I missed her? That I'd destroyed my marriage for the chance to play pretend with her for a few months? The loneliness was crushing. Not just the absence of companionship, but the weight of knowing I'd earned every empty evening, every silent weekend, every holiday spent alone. I'd had love, real love, and I'd traded it for the emotional equivalent of fast food. That's when I started calling my parents more often. Desperate for some kind of connection, some reminder that someone in the world gave about me. They'd listen patiently while I told them about the divorce, offer vague comfort about how I'd find someone new, how things would work out. But they never offered help. Never suggested I come stay with them while I got back on my feet. Never offered to loan me money for a security deposit on a better apartment. I told they were just being respectful of my independence, giving me space to figure things out. Last week, I found out the truth. I was having dinner with my cousin Marcus for the first time in years. We'd grown together but drifted apart as adults, only seeing each other at family gatherings. Over drinks, he started thanking me for being so understanding about the family situation, how much it meant to him that I never made our parents feel guilty about their choice. I had no idea what he was talking about. It took 3 more drinks and a lot of confused questions before the full picture emerged. For the past 8 years, the same 8 years I'd been struggling paycheck to paycheck with Sarah, my parents had been sending Marcus $2,000 every month, helping him pay for his graduate degree, his wedding, the down payment on his house, his kids' daycare. The money I'd been told didn't exist, that my family had never had been flowing to Marcus this entire time. While I ate ramen and skipped meals to make rent, while Sarah worked overtime at a job she hated to help cover our bills, while we postponed having kids because we couldn't afford them, my parents were bankrolling my cousin's comfortable middle class. They said we're doing fine. Marcus explained, looking confused by my reaction. That never asked for help, so they figured didn't need it. They were worried about seeming like they were playing favorites. Playing favorites. That's exactly what they'd been doing, just not in my favor. The conversation that followed was brutal. Marcus had assumed I knew, had been wondering for years why I never seemed resentful about their arrangement. He'd been grateful but also guilty, especially after his parents died and left him their house while I was getting divorced and moving into increasingly shittier apartments. I drove home that night feeling like my entire had been built on a lie. Not just my marriage, but my fundamental understanding of who I was and where I came from. I'd based my identity on being the son who never asked for help, who figured things out on his own, who was too proud to burden his family with his problems. Turns out, I was just the son they decided wasn't worth investing in. I called them the next morning, barely holding together. When I explained what Marcus had told me, there was a long pause before my mother started making excuses. Marcus had been struggling, she said. He'd needed help getting established. They'd thought I was doing fine because I never complained. I never complained because taught me not to ask for help. I screamed into the phone. Told me money was tight, that the family was barely scraping by, that I needed to be grateful for what I had. We were trying to teach independence. My father said when he got on the line, Marcus was always more dependent. We thought we were helping build character. Character. I'd been building character while they built Marcus up. The worst part was realizing how this had shaped everything. How my resentment about money, about never having enough, about watching other people live better lives had poisoned my marriage. I'd cheated on Sarah partly because I felt deprived, because I thought I deserved better than the scraps had given me, but hadn't given me scraps. My parents had. They'd chosen to watch their son struggle while supporting someone else's success, and I'd internalized that rejection so completely that I'd started rejecting the good things I actually had. Sarah had loved me despite my insecurities about money, despite my bitterness about our limited options. She'd found ways to be happy in our tiny apartment, had made our cheap date nights feel special, had never once made me feel inadequate for not being able to provide more. I'd had a woman who saw abundance in what we'd built together, and I'd thrown her away because I thought I deserved the material success my parents had quietly decided I wasn't worth investing in. Now I sit in my studio apartment, surrounded by the I thought I wanted to escape, and realize this is what I actually deserved. Not because of some cosmic justice, but because of the choices I made, the lies I told, the love I discarded because it wasn't shiny enough. Marcus texted me yesterday to check in, to make sure I was okay after our conversation. His concern felt genuine, and I found hating him for that. It would be easier if he wasn't, if I could blame him for accepting help I was never offered. But he'd been grateful and guilty and assumed I was living the I'd chosen. I haven't spoken to my parents since that phone call. They've left messages, sent texts asking if we can talk. But I can't figure out what there is to say. Sorry won't give me back the years of financial stress. It won't undo the resentment that helped destroy my marriage. It won't restore my faith in the people who were supposed to love me most. And it won't bring Sarah back. She's engaged now, to a guy she met in her hiking group. I found out through Facebook, saw the photos of them at some scenic overlook, her smile brighter than I'd seen it in years. He looks like a good man. The kind who probably doesn't need his ego fed by strangers, who appreciates what he has instead of always wanting more. I think about calling her sometimes, not to win her back but just to apologize properly. To explain about my parents, about how the money thing had twisted me inside, about how none of my cheating was really about her. But that would just be another selfish act disguised as noble intention. The truth is simpler and uglier than I want to admit. I cheated because I chose to cheat. I lied because I chose to lie. I away the best thing in my because I was too broken to recognize its value. My parents' favoritism explains some of my damage, but it doesn't excuse what I did with that damage. Plenty of people grow feeling deprived or overlooked without betraying the people who love them. I could have talked to Sarah about my insecurities instead of nursing them into resentment. I could have asked my parents for help instead of assuming it didn't exist. Instead, I chose the path that led here, alone in an apartment, off from my family, divorced from the only woman who ever saw past my flaws to love the man I could have been. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent years feeling like my parents had chosen someone else over me, and then I proved them right by becoming exactly the kind of person who wasn't worth investing in. I ruined the one relationship where someone had chosen me first, and now that's all I'll ever be. The man had everything in it away, because he convinced himself he deserved better.